Hello and welcome to Beckler Guitars and Repairs. Today we're going to be doing the segment called Blind Repair. So I've done a couple of these before. Basically, a customer drops up a guitar, I don't even look at it, and we figure out what's wrong with it and fix it all on video. So, yeah, so here it is. It is Fender Acoustic. It's kind of a cheaper one. It's a CD60 Dreadnought. Needs a new saddle. They prefer a tusk saddle and nut, which is like a man-made ivory. A little cheaper than bone, a little more expensive than plastic. They want the nut replaced too. It looks like it's kind of an ill-fitting nut someone kind of put in there, so it's looks like someone already tried to kind of fix that. They want it set up and restrung, and it's also missing a machine head. So it says on the sheet that the machine head that they want replaced doesn't really matter as long as it fits the screw pattern. So I believe I have some parts kicking around that will work. Other things I see is there's a little bit of cracking in the back next to the heel joint. Looks just like it's a lacquer crack though, not to the wood. We've got no other cracks or anything else like that. So, okay, pretty self-explanatory. So we're going to go ahead and get it on the bench and start working on it. Okay, first things first, here's a relatively simple way to remove a nut. So this only works if there's not like a piece of wood that isn't flush behind it. Like on a Fender, like on a Stratocaster, there's actually two ridges of wood with the nut in between. On an acoustic, typically though, the nut is just flush with the fingerboard and there's nothing behind it. So these are usually glued in. So if you take something with a flat back, something like this, that you can slide against the frets and then hit the nut, you can slowly kind of knock it out of place. So let's just try that. So yeah, one hit is all it took. It wasn't in there that bad. So here's the nut that was on it. Hold on. Yeah, so this nut's just kind of a cheap plastic nut, and we're going to place it with something a little bit better. And then as far as this channel goes, there's quite a bit of residue, like glue residue in there that we'll need to clean out. Alright, so now I'm going to show how to remove the glue from the channel for the nut. So any kind of chisel will do. I've got my old reliable one here. So we're just trying to get any of the glue residue out, so the next nut that goes in fits nice and tight. So you're just trying to do your best to remove any kind of glue residue that's going to affect the way that the new nut fits in there. So that should be good enough for what we're doing. Alright, so here's my nut that's going to be going in here. I spent some time off camera making sure this is going to fit perfectly. So your nut might require a little bit more sanding on the sides just to make sure it's nice and flush with the neck. Or it might be a little bit too tall, so you might have to sand it down. This is a pre-cut tusk nut. You can also make them from scratch. Usually bone is the material, but I believe you can get blanks for new bone or tusk material as well. Here's a little bit of a trick so you know you get the right height for your nut. So I take a pencil and I put it on the belt sander and I sand it directly in half. That way you can place it on the frets, and the tip of the pencil should be right where your string should be sitting in your nut. So if your nut's too small, they'll sit too low, then you're going to get things like buzz and stuff like that because your nut slots are going to be cut too shallow. But this one's going to work just perfect for what we're doing. So what I like to do is just to glue it in with one little dot of super glue, and then just let that set. And that just makes sure it stays in place. A good fitting nut, you don't even need super glue. The tension from the strings is actually enough. but people like them to stay in place. If you're changing strings and stuff like that, it can be a pain if it's you know, popping out all the time. So yeah, so I'm going to let that sit, and then we can move on to the saddle. Alright, so next is the saddle. So here's a nice tusk compensated saddle. Compensated means is that there's a little bit of an adjustment, so the intonation will be better on the top of the saddle. You can get like straight saddles that are just straight across, but these just help with intonation a bit because the string lies. It's kind of the way a saddle works on like a tunematic bridge. You can move the saddles forward or back. This is kind of how they should lie for the best intonation. So I just tried it out, dry fitting, and it's tight, but it fits. So the tension of the strings should be able to push it right down into where it needs to go. Just want to make sure that it's actually fitting in there properly. And it is a little tall, so I'm going to have to sand it down. So I have a belt sander, so what I'll do is I'll just put it on the surface of the belt sander, and it'll quickly take off as much material as I need. I can also lay it this way on the belt sander to make it a little more thin to fit in the nut slot a little bit better. So that's about it for the saddle. I typically I'll put a string in and string it up just to see how high the action is with the saddle, so I have like a base idea of how high this needs to be. Or I can just kind of work on it as I go. Like if it needs to be lowered, I'll take off some more material and more material. The problem is if it's too low and you can't take off any more material, that's you either have to start again with a new saddle, or you need to shim up the saddle slot here. So preferably we don't want to use shims. It's fine to do so if you need to, but if we cut this correctly and take our time, then we won't need any shims later. Alright, so I ended up having to take off a little bit of material from the shoulders, and then I just took a tiny, like a touch on the belt sander to make it a little bit narrow, just so it fits in there snug but not too tight. And then I took a little bit of material off the bottom here, so it's sitting a little bit lower. I likely am going to have to take off more material to make the action where I want it, but it's pretty close for now. So now we can move on to the machine head issue. Alright, so I managed to find another machine head that's very similar in style, and it's going to match the screw pattern. This is just an extra part I had lying around. So this will work quite well for this guitar. Let's go ahead and install it. Screw it into place on the front, and then I just need to screw it in. I dropped the screw, great. Got another screw, and I'm just going to use the electric to make it quick on camera here. Alright, so that part is done. Now we can move on to stringing up the guitar, tuning it up, getting the action set correctly with the truss rod, and maybe removing some material from the saddle, intonating it and tuning it and testing it. I'm going to be restringing it with a set of EJ16s, which is a light gauge from D'Addario. They're just kind of your average good quality strings that aren't too expensive, and they sound quite nice. I just wanted to show how I personally like to trim the strings. So I like to give myself about a quarter, or sorry, rather an eighth of an inch sticking out. And then I like to take a pair of needle nose pliers to bend them over. Yeah, and then what this does is it just leaves it safe to, you know, put your hand all around it and over it, and you're not going to risk getting poked by those strings. I also want to just discuss my restringing method. What I like to do on the wound strings, I like to have at least 2, 3 at most winds around the peg. And then for my unwound strings, I'll have 3 or 4 winds. I just find that's the best way for tuning stability. I've tried every style of restringing method throughout the years, and I just find this is the most effective. It's the easiest to take your strings off without worrying about, you know, knots and trying to undo knots and the posts and stuff like that. I don't think that's necessary. I've always found that this is the best method for me. It just keeps the guitar in tune really well. It's easy to restring afterwards, and yeah, the tuning stability is really good. Okay, I just want to briefly show my string stretching method. So I've got these all tuned up to pitch, just quickly with like a snark. And now I'm going to go ahead and pull up on the string, but I'm also going to bend it horizontally. So the motion is up and over throughout the whole length of the string. And you want to do that 2 or 3 times per string. So this is just going to take a lot of the pain out of keeping strings in tune right when you restring them for the first time. Because usually after you restring a guitar, it takes a while before it's going to stay in tune. And this really speeds up the process. I find it works quite well. Now, your G string is under the most tension. So you want to be careful, you don't want to pull too hard, because this is the easiest string to snap. And then your B and your E, same kind of a deal, just because, not because they're under the most tension, but they're a lot smaller strings in diameter, so they also can break, and they're unwound. D'Addario strings I find are pretty good. I haven't broke too many. Elixir, on the other hand, I've broke lots. It might just be coincidence, but they seem to be a little easier to break. Okay, so now that the strings are stretched, I'll show you the action on here really quickly. So at the 3rd fret, if we fret, we can see that the string is just nicely resting against the fret. So I am going to check the setup here pretty quick by playing it, but I did a quick strum on it and it seemed to be good. And here's the action at the 12th, which is nice and low. That means our saddle is shaved to the correct height. Yeah, it looks like it's at 2 at the low E and about 1.5 at the high E. So that's quite low action, especially for an acoustic. And I tried, we're going to try all the frets to make sure there's no buzz as well. So using my notched straight edge, we can see how much relief is in the neck. So if you look between the straight edge and the fretboard, you can see there's just a tiny bit of relief in there. So we could actually maybe increase that a bit if we do get some buzz. But it's set pretty nice. And then we're just going to check the frets. Okay, so yeah, there's no buzz anywhere. I went up and down the whole fretboard. Our action's nice and low, so our setup looks great. So let's go ahead and tune it with the Strobo Bus tuner for the most accuracy. Make sure our intonation's in, and we can go ahead and just hear how the guitar sounds a little bit. Okay, I just want to quickly show how to use the Strobo Plus tuner as best as possible. So I've changed the sweetener to acoustic, and so that's all you really need to do to get the best setting for acoustic. So I'm just going to go ahead and tune. So when the wheels stop spinning, that's when you're really close to being into perfectly in tune. So I'm going to stop talking because that really messes with the tuner because it's based on a microphone. When it's going counterclockwise, that means you're flat, and when it's going clockwise, it means you're sharp. Alright, so yeah, this is pretty much to and then you can check at the 12th fret to see how your intonation is. So the intonation is bang on as well. Okay, so here's our blind repair number 3 all finished. And that is the Fender CD60 Dreadnought. It's a decent little guitar once it was all fixed up. So there's our new saddle. And our new nut. And we replaced the machine head as well. The fingerboard was already in pretty good condition. It didn't need any conditioning or hydrating, didn't need to use any lemon oil, and our nut slot was a little chewed up, so we had to do a little bit of chiseling, and then we set it up. We set the action with the truss rod. We removed some of the material in our saddle to get it to appropriate action, and then we restrung it, tuned it, and tested it. So let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. A little bit of with a pick now. right, yeah, so after all the work's done, it sounds pretty nice. Yeah, and so that's how you replace your saddle, your nut, a machine head. That's how you do a proper setup on an acoustic, how you intonate it, how you restring it, how you tune it. Thanks for tuning in to Beckler Guitars and Repair. This has been Blind Repair number 3, and thanks for stopping by. We'll have more for you soon. Thanks a lot.